Hi, Andrew Harris from Old Coast Road Brewery in the Parade Hotel. I did a series not long ago about different styles of beer that we make, and we got a pretty good response to that series of videos, so we thought we'd make one about the beer making process. So I'm up here at Old Coast Road Brewery. The boys are going to put a brew down pretty soon, so I thought I'd follow the process step by step and just explain to people who are familiar with commercial brewing how the process works. And this process is the same whether it's at a small brewery like ours or at the biggest breweries that you might find around the world. It's the same basic process. So, first step is, I suppose, to look at the prime ingredient of beer, and that is malt. And of course, there's also hops and yeast, but we'll start with the malt. That's the basis of all beers. So, what is malt? It's a question I ask if I'm giving a brewery tour, and a lot of people say, oh, it's a powder, it's the powdery stuff that your mum used to mix up in a drink. No, that's dried malt extract. Some people say it's the syrup that you get from the homebrew shop that you pour out to make your homebrew. That again is a malt extract, that's a liquid malt extract. It's not actually malt. Malt is really just grain, usually barley, that's been through a malting process, which is what they do at a malt house. So if you look at malt, there's a clue here. It comes in a bag. That's what malt is. So I've got a bag open here of wheat malt. So if I pull that out, that just looks like wheat. And if it was barley malt, it would look like barley. But it's not just wheat off the farm or barley just off the farm. You can't just get barley off the farm and make beer out of it. Well, you can, but you'd need to add some other stuff to it. It wouldn't happen naturally like it does in the normal beer making process. So what they do at a malt house is they get the barley or wheat, they steep it, which means they soak it in water until a certain moisture content is achieved, and the barley or wheat begins to sprout. It puts out some little roots and a little stem called an acrospire, and during that process there are some changes inside the grain, some chemical changes, and those changes result in some proteins being broken down into enzymes, and those enzymes are what we need to make sugar, and the sugar is what gets converted into alcohol by the yeast. So later on I'll get a whiteboard and I'll draw up some diagrams to explain the chemical process, but just know that a malting is a critical process that's not done by the brewery. It's normally done by a specialist maltster, and it involves a breakdown of some proteins that are in the barley that produce enzymes that later help us make sugar. So I can see our brewer's got his malt ready for tomorrow. We've got some German malt here, some Weyermann malt. You can see we've got some Marisotto, which is an English malt. You can see down here, one's got Tasmania written on it. That's a Joe White malt from Tasmania. So malts come from all over the world, different styles of malts for different beers. So we might use a German malt for a German beer, an English malt, which is what Marisotto is for an English beer. Part of the malting process is that they have to dry the grain. They don't want it to grow into a plant. So once it's reached a certain stage, they'll dry it out in an oven. Then they can take that one step further and they can actually roast the malt. And you can see up here, we've got some malt that's been roasted. And it's a similar process to what they would do with coffee beans. So you end up with a burnt, caramelised grain. And you can imagine that when we crush that up, which is the next part of the process, I'll show you that in the next video, that's going to produce, like a coffee bean, it's going to get ground up and it's going to produce some nice dark colour in the beer, and it's going to produce some nice chocolate, burnt type aromas, so some coffee-like aromas. So when you drink a stout or a porter or a dark beer, that is what's giving you that colour and flavour. And you don't need that much of that. A little bit of it goes a long way, it's quite strong. So if we make a dark beer like a stout or a porter, it will still mostly be pale malt. Whoops, we've lost that down the hole. It'll mostly be pale malt, so that's unroasted malt. So it's the colour of the wheat malt I showed you there, and there'll be a little bit of this to darken it. And depending on how dark we want it, more of that will be added. There's also malts that are in between, so there's what they call crystal malt, which is malt that is not really darkly roasted, but it's a little bit caramelised. So it's got an amber type of colour to it, and that gives you some toffee type flavours in the beer. So lots of different malts, different roasting levels, mix them together, millions of different recipes to get different things. Wheat malt, as I showed you before, normally in a wheat beer you would mix that about 50-50 with barley to make a wheat beer. Wheat beers are not normally fully wheat, they've normally still got barley in them. Barley is the basis of most beers, as I said. Okay, so that's malt. As I said, I'll do in a future video a bit more about the enzymes and what happens with those in the malting process. Next video we'll get on to the milling or crushing of the malt in preparation to make a mash. Thanks for watching.